Hey, folks, this segment is pretty short. It just looks at life, what it means to be alive, and then some general processes that occur to help maintain that. So that leads us off with the first question. What does it mean to be alive? So you can have things that have certain properties but aren't necessarily alive. You can have substances with the ability to respond, but they don't have all the features associated with life. You can have a motion sensor respond and flip on a light, but that's not necessarily alive. So now let's take a more global look to think about what does it actually mean to be alive. So first of all, anything that's alive has certain physical features like being made of cells. So cells are little individual structures that have within them materials like DNA and proteins that can work together to sort of carry out functions we associate with life. Organisms do have to have the ability to respond to changes either in the environment or within themselves. So there's always this ability to respond. Uh, Part and parcel with that is metabolism. Metabolism is basically having chemical reactions, organized chemical reactions occur within cells. So cells are constantly taking in energy and materials and then using that energy to rearrange materials. That's how you can take, a hamburger and use it to fuel your body. Living organisms will grow and develop. They do that basically by adding cells and having those cells specialize in the different tissues and organs and organ systems. Reproduction is absolutely part of life. Now, that can be like whole organism reproduction, like, making babies, but it can also be cells making copies of cells. Because when you look at yourself sitting here made of trillions of cells, you started your existence as a single cell, and that one cell divided into two on four, and so on. So, reproduction is something that occurs throughout your life. Um, Adaptation is something that occurs as populations change and evolve. And then the feature that we'll get into next year is regulation. You have to be able to sort of maintain constant conditions in order for life to continue. So that idea of maintaining a constant state is called homeostasis. Stasis means standing or staying the same, and stasis means standing or staying, and homos means same. So homeostasis, your body's trying to maintain constant conditions. That could be body temperature, it could be pH of the blood, it could be oxygen saturation of the blood, uh, your glucose levels in your bloodstream. So your body tries to maintain sort of a steady state under most circumstances. This is, though, a dynamic process because things are happening outside of you and inside of you. You can have gone a long time between meals and your blood sugar starts to drop a little bit. You can go outside and it's real hot. And so, whether things are happening outside of us or inside of us, conditions can shift or change, and the body needs to be able to respond. So, an overview of that is what I think of as detecting, deciding, and then instructing. And this is looking at sort of a reflex arc in your nervous system. So the receptor detects what's going on. So you see in the image, you can have a pin poking into the skin, and that can stimulate pain receptors to the skin. So the receptor detects what's happening again, either outside or inside the body. Then there's an electrical signal here. It's traveling along what's called the afferent pathway. So the afferent path, I think afferent goes at your central nervous system, which is basically your brain and spinal cord. So the receptor detects what's going on. An electrical signal carries that information to your central nervous system. And then your central nervous system, your brain and your spinal cord, those are the deciders. They send out electrical impulses or don't. And what that does is allow the body to respond in certain ways. So those instructions are sent out through what's called the efferent pathway. I think efferent exits the central nervous system. And so an electrical signal travels quickly to what's called an effector. And the effector is either muscles or glands. They can do something. Glands can secrete different substances, and then muscles can contract. So your skin may detect that you're touching something sharp. Your spinal cord recognizes that and decides to respond, and then your muscles contract and you pull away. So here is a little follow up question on this idea of maintaining homeostasis. says, what impact would a disruption in the efferent pathway have on the body's ability to detect stimuli? Well, here's the receptor, there's the muscle, there's the effector. Here is your afferent pathway going at the central nervous system. Here's your spinal cord, and here's the efferent pathway. So if you disrupt this, think about the one-way transmission of the signals. The signal starts here and winds up here in the muscles. So if you disrupt the efferent pathway, that would inhibit the ability of muscles to contract. But with the afferent pathway, if it's still intact, could you still perceive, the stimulus, the sharp touch of the cactus? Well, yeah. Now, in practicality, these wires tend to run together, sort of like a divided highway. And so if you sever one, you tend to sever both. But theoretically, at least, you could sever the efferent pathway and be able to detect the stimulus, but not be able to respond. All right, now let's talk about this notion of homeostasis. The way the body typically does that is through what are referred to as negative feedback mechanisms. Now, negative feedback sounds bad, but it's actually really good, because what negative feedback does is help you maintain homeostasis. It does this through inhibiting whatever it creates. So a lot of times, if your body will produce something or some sort of response, it'll actually inhibit that so you don't have a buildup or too much of it occur. Think about your muscles. If your muscles start moving and you're being really active, you're going to produce a lot of carbon dioxide. If you produce carbon dioxide, you dump it into your blood, and then carbon dioxide starts to build up in your blood. And again, that's toxic. So what do you do if you're using your muscles and exercising, and your CO2 is building up? You start breathing more heavily. And if you breathe more heavily, you blow out that CO2. And so CO2 levels go back down in the bloodstream. So again, the idea of negative feedback is if something starts to build up, you stop it so that levels start to go back down. The opposite of that is positive feedback. The way I remember this, I think positive feedback pushes you away from homeostasis. So with positive feedback, some product that's created will actually cause more of its own production. And a good example of this is the relationship of hormones through progression through childbirth. So if the head of the baby is pushing on the cervix, that's the neck or the end of the uterus, what that can do is stimulate the production of this hormone oxytocin. And what oxytocin can do is cause the uterus to contract. Well, if the uterus contracts, what happens? You get more pressure on the cervix. That causes the release of more oxytocin, which causes more contractions, longer and more pronounced contractions. So you get this feedback loop going until you have the active labor where the cervix is completely effaced or opened up, and the uterus is having long, steady contractions, and you can push the baby out. So then what happens there is, baby's out, the placenta comes out, and then the stimulus is gone. Okay? So again, positive feedback is a much rarer circumstance. Okay, so let's think of an example here. You got an adorable little puppy. Says, would the panting of an overheated dog be considered negative feedback or positive feedback? Do explain. Well, tick tock, tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. Negative feedback, right? The panting of the dog is negative feedback because if the dog's temperature rises, well, then it's become overheated. So to help cool it back down, it starts panting to release that heat and bring itself back down to homeostasis. So again, typically if you run into stuff, it's going to be an example of negative feedback. Positive feedback only happens when you get pushed further and further away from homeostasis. All right, take another quick break here. You can go stand up and stretch a little bit, go take the cat for a walk, whatever you need to do.